Rubrics. Are they good? Are they bad? Useful or not? I know that there are mixed opinions about this, and I've had 10 years in the classroom to figure this out. So really, rubrics have their use. But you know what? A lot of people have a hard time grading with them. I know that I did. So we use them on essays or large assignments or even projects, sometimes even short assignments, and especially at the high school, maybe even junior high level. They're sets of information that tell the students or the person creating the project or the thing all of the elements that they should include, all of the criteria it's going to be evaluated by. That can be a great thing. But it can be very difficult on the grading end. As a teacher, I had a lot of difficulty deciding, well, what rubrics really fit? What really works here? Are these appropriate for the age? Are they appropriate for the assignment? Do the students even understand them? And so there's a lot of ambiguity surrounding this tool. And so let's talk about it. So in my 10 years, I went from using rubrics and adapting them and having them for almost everything to having them for the student side, but not really using them for grading. So here's what happened. When I was using them, students would look at them a little bit at the beginning, but not always. And they would write the assignment, they would write the essay, and they would create it. And then on the back end, I would be looking at the rubric, and I would be looking at the point values that I had assigned to it, and I would be trying to grade it. I'd be like, all right, well, how many points does this section get? Did they have the thesis correct? Do they have all their evidence in there? Are they following the guidelines? Do they have good grammar? Did they actually read the prompt? All of these things. And at the beginning of my teaching career, all of those elements had a designated score assigned to it of the different levels of proficient down to not proficient or not understanding or needs work or something along those lines. There's always some sort of category definition for each level of did the student do this or how well did the student do this. And that can be useful in a lot of ways. But when I was scoring the essays, being so committed to those predetermined scores actually became a detriment, because I would be looking at the essays and I would be thinking, well, yeah, they missed this part, but that takes their grade down to a C, and this is really a B paper just because they missed this other thing that usually should be scored like the rubric says. They don't deserve a C. They don't deserve to be down in that C range. This is a B paper. And so then you run into, do you add additional points and stuff like that? So ultimately, I didn't like using the rubrics on the grading end, because I liked to be able to, because I knew, especially after a few years of experience, I knew what a B paper looked like. I knew what I had in my mind for the paper or the assignment or the project. I knew what grade they should get, and I could articulate that to them. I could point out the things that made them miss points and the things that gave them the points or gave them the score that they got. But the rubric generally ended up being lower than the paper really deserved, and I didn't like that. And so ultimately, and I tried 1-point rubrics, I tried all sorts of things. Ultimately, I moved away from using them during grading. I didn't grade with the rubric anymore. I did, however, leave the rubrics in as instructional material. I have the rubrics for the students to use because it did help them in putting together the essay or the project. It was very important, actually, for them to have all of those steps there. They didn't always get them. Students just don't always read the rule, all of the criteria and all of the expectations. They just skim through it, if they read it at all. I know. But for the ones that did, for the ones that had a little bit of care and concern for their grade, they would look through it and it was very useful to them. But it was useful on the writing end, on the creation end, not on the grading end. So here's my recommendation. Have that target in your mind. And if you don't have the experience, if you're a homeschool parent and you're just unsure, then you can look at the prompt. Really grade off the prompt that you gave. If there are criteria in the prompt, and by prompt I mean you had a question with things that they were supposed to do and or instructions about how they were supposed to complete this essay, that's the prompt. So you have all of the criteria that you need for grading in that prompt. You're grading off of that and based off of the things that they should generally know by this point. If you've taught certain grammar rules, certain comma rules, if you've been emphasizing something recently in their writing that they should know, then you're going to grade off of that because that's what they already should know, and the prompt is right there. So just have that in your mind, or if you have a target essay in your mind or a target amount of skill, writing skill in your mind that you're grading off of, grade off of that. Because ultimately it's a lot easier to look through an essay or a project and go, you know, these few things here are just not done quite up to par. And here's why. And you give targeted feedback. That's the key. Because ultimately the students on the grading end also don't read through the rubric. You can score it and you can comment it and it's all right there, and they could probably have figured out what they did wrong, but they don't read it. And if they do read it, they generally don't understand it. Like, it actually is a very difficult skill to be able to write up a rubric that is in language a student understands rather than a language a teacher understands. And so it's not really useful to you in grading because it limits you too much, and then it's not useful to the student in feedback because they can't understand it. So what you should be doing is going in and giving very targeted feedback. If they are messing up on their commas, or like some of my students this previous year didn't capitalize I's or had commas at the beginning of the word instead of the end of the previous word. Those are very targeted things. If they missed a piece of evidence, if they didn't cite something, they didn't use something correctly, if a paragraph was too short, all of those things are very, very targeted, and that is actually going to help them improve the essay. And so you can essentially tally up those things in your mind if you're making a running list of comments, and then you're going to be looking at those and thinking about, are they minor errors or major errors? How bad is it? Are there things that are really, really good while other things are really bad? You're just going to be kind of weighing all that out and figuring out, okay, so really this is the grade this essay deserves, and here are all the reasons why. That is so much more useful for you in the grading and so much more useful for the student. So once again, rubrics, we can find lots of ways to use them. And I do think that they are useful if you keep them succinct and clear. They are useful when the student is writing the essay or creating the project. But I don't think that they're as useful in grading. I think that the prompt and knowing what you've taught in your curriculum or knowing about where they should be at, that is way more useful in the grading than a rubric. Okay? So think about those things. And think about the student that you're teaching as well. What are their skill levels? Because when I was grading with a rubric, I had to grade everybody pretty close to the same, and there were some students that just weren't at the level of other students. We are told as teachers in the public school to differentiate. That means grading as much as we can towards ability. I mean, students are grouped by age instead of ability, which is a big problem, and we should figure out a way to fix that in schools. But still, we were trying to bring things to different levels and grade at the level based on what they had been able to learn in the class, what they came in with. And having a really strict rubric structure creates an issue there. But if I don't have that strict rubric structure and I can look at the essay and I can have a target in my mind for that particular student, and if you are working with smaller classes or if you're working with just your kids at home, you know your kid and their abilities very well. And you are looking for growth. You're looking for, this is what we tried to do and what we learned, this is where they should be at. But you have been working with them so closely that you're able to know that. And so you can have that target in your mind and you can grade to that target rather than having this rubric that is a really set structure. And I know that some people will say that this is a very subjective method of grading, but let's be honest. We're talking about kids here. We're talking about teenagers. Everybody's a little bit different. And writing is a little bit subjective. I have arguments about how it's less subjective than we think it is. There are definitely skills and structures and things we can do to make it less subjective, but there is an amount of subjectivity to writing, and also with how big the skill gaps are in students. Like, we need to be a little bit subjective, but we're not super subjective. We have that target on our mind. We have the prompt. There were specific things that they were supposed to do in the project instructions, and so they need to be meeting those. And especially if you've taught something specifically, they need to be meeting that. They need to have been able to show that skill. And there's a lot of complexity surrounding all this. There's lots of other things to consider, and I'm going to talk about those types of things in other videos. And I talk about that, and I give tips on my newsletter that you should join, links in the bio. But for rubrics themselves, I like them on the front end with helping to write or create the piece because they provide all of the information that's needed. But on the grading end, I don't like them. They're just not as useful there. They're not as helpful. So hey, if you need some other tips, if you need some other help, don't forget to go to my bio. And I'm also going to try to link my newsletter in the description, but the link for my newsletter is in the bio and should be in the first comment there. But I give lots of tips, extra help, content, other resources. So go ahead and check that out. It's the Living WordPress newsletter. I am a 10-year veteran teacher in the public schools in English and an author of science fiction and fantasy. So I know writing really well. And I've taught a lot of kids how to write way better than they were able to write before they came through my class. So I know the things I'm talking about. I know how to break this down. And I have experience looking at writing and taking it into component parts that I can pass on to you. So you definitely want to go and get on that newsletter. But also don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel here on YouTube and watch out for other content coming your way.